"You have kind eyes," she told her blind date, before learning who he really was. 5 minutes into the blind date, Sophie Parker said the one thing Daniel Reed had not heard in 6 years. She looked across the small cafe table, smiled nervously, and said, "You have kind eyes." Daniel almost dropped his coffee. Not because the compliment was strange, because for a long time, people had called his eyes many things. No one who knew his name ever started there. Sophie did not notice his reaction at first. She was too busy trying to survive the date without following the instructions her sister kept sending in rapid-fire text messages. Her phone buzzed again beside her cup. "Claire, ask about his job, but casually. Do not mention your classroom hamster. Actually, maybe mention the hamster. Men like responsibility." Sophie flipped the phone face down. Daniel noticed. "Everything okay? My sister thinks this date requires live coaching." That sounds terrifying. She once described herself as a romantic strategist. Is that a real profession? Only in her apartment. Daniel smiled, and Sophie relaxed a little. Claire had arranged the date through a friend of a friend, which meant Sophie had received exactly 3 facts about him. His name was Daniel. He was 30. He worked with boats. That was it. Claire had called it mysterious. Sophie had called it how people end up on crime podcasts. Still, she had agreed, mostly because Claire had used the phrase, "You cannot spend your whole life teaching 4-year-olds how to share crayons and then go home to eat cereal for dinner." Sophie had argued that cereal was underrated. Claire had not been moved. Daniel had arrived before her. She had spotted him immediately at a corner table in the Seattle cafe, sitting too straight, hands around a coffee cup he had not touched. He wore a navy jacket, simple jeans, and the expression of a man waiting for bad news rather than a blind date. Sophie almost turned around. Not because he looked unfriendly, because he looked afraid. That softened her. Now, 15 minutes later, she had learned he was quiet but funny in a dry, careful way. He listened, like listening mattered. He asked questions without making her feel inspected. Then Sophie reached for her coffee. Her sleeve caught the rim. The cup tipped. Coffee splashed across the table and directly onto the front of her pale blue dress. For 1 full second, both of them stared. Then Sophie whispered, "I have chosen elegance." Daniel grabbed napkins from the dispenser so fast he nearly knocked over the sugar jar. "I'm sorry," he said, as if he had personally arranged the spill. "You didn't do it. I witnessed it." Very suspicious. He handed her a stack of napkins. Their fingers brushed. It was small, ridiculously small, but Sophie felt it anyway. Daniel looked away first. She dabbed at her dress, making the stain worse. "Well," she said, "now you know the truth. I'm not mysterious. I'm just damp." Daniel laughed. A real laugh. Brief, surprised, almost rusty, like he had not expected it from himself. That was when Sophie really looked at him. Not at the jacket, or the nervous hands, or the careful way he kept glancing toward the door whenever someone entered. At him. There was sadness in his face, yes, something tired, something guarded. But beneath it, there was gentleness. Not softness exactly. Gentleness that had survived damage. The words left her before she could overthink them. "You have kind eyes." Daniel went completely still. The cafe noise seemed to fade behind him. Sophie immediately regretted everything. "Oh no," she said. "That sounded weird." He blinked. "No, it did. It sounded like something a grandmother says before offering soup." "No, it's just, I promise I don't usually review people's facial features before the first refill." Daniel looked down at his coffee. His thumb moved slowly along the paper cup. Then he said, very quietly, "Thank you." Something about the way he said it made Sophie stop joking. It was not flirtatious. It was not casual. It sounded like she had given him something he did not know what to do with. Her phone buzzed again. "Lair, is he cute? Send signal. Touch your necklace if yes. If no, fake stomach pain." Sophie turned the phone off. Daniel noticed. "Firing your strategist?" She needs to learn boundaries. Brave. Reckless, actually. She has a key to my apartment. This time his smile came easier. They talked for another hour. About her kindergarten class. About his boat repair work near Tacoma. About bad first dates, terrible parking. They walked along the waterfront near Tacoma, where gulls screamed like unpaid actors and the air smelled of salt, rain, and fried food from nearby stalls. Daniel pointed out the types of boats in the harbor. Sophie pretended to understand, then admitted she thought all boats were basically cars that had made risky life choices. Daniel laughed so hard he had to stop walking. That laugh was becoming her favorite thing about him. But there were small mysteries. He never asked to take pictures. When Sophie pulled out her phone near the water and tried to capture the sunset, Daniel stepped aside so naturally she almost missed it. At the weekend market, a vendor offered to take their photo in front of a flower wall. Sophie smiled. Daniel's face changed, only for a second. Then he said he hated staged pictures. At dinner, when she asked if he used Instagram, he said no. Facebook? No. LinkedIn? He looked genuinely offended. Sophie teased him about being secretly 90 years old. Daniel accepted this with dignity. Still, she noticed, he lived like someone trying not to leave fingerprints. One afternoon, he came by the preschool to pick her up for dinner. Sophie found him outside the classroom door being interrogated by Mia, a 5-year-old with pigtails, light-up sneakers, and the moral intensity of a Supreme Court justice. "Are you Miss Sophie's boyfriend?" Daniel looked at Sophie for help. Sophie offered none. "I'm her friend," he said carefully. Mia narrowed her eyes. "Do you have snacks?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Daniel considered this. "That's a fair question. Can you do a cartwheel?" "No." "Can you fix dinosaurs? Toy dinosaurs or real dinosaurs?" Mia looked disappointed. "You don't know anything." Sophie laughed until her stomach hurt. Later, at a diner with cracked red booths and excellent fries, Daniel admitted he had never been more afraid in his life. Of a 5-year-old? She had follow-up questions. "She liked you. She threatened to judge my shoes. That means she respected you." Daniel looked down at his boots. "Should I be worried?" "Always." These were the moments that made Sophie forget the questions. The missing photos. The careful silences. The way Daniel's face sometimes shut down when someone said the word accident, even in ordinary conversation. With her, he was gentle, awkward, funny in small, unexpected bursts. He remembered she hated olives. He remembered the name of the classroom hamster Claire had warned her not to mention. He remembered that her confidence often arrived late to conversations and made room for it. And Daniel liked that Sophie did not try to impress him. She arrived with coffee stains, glitter in her hair, classroom paint on her sleeve. She told him stories where she was not always flattering. She admitted she was bad at parallel parking and worse at pretending to understand wine. He found her honesty almost frightening. People usually tried to become better versions of themselves around him. Sophie seemed relieved to be exactly herself. The trouble came at the Harbor Lights Festival. It was the kind of local event where every booth sold something handmade, overpriced, or fried. Strings of bulbs hung over the street. A band played near the pier. Children ran past with painted faces and sugar-heavy confidence. Sophie was laughing because Daniel had just lost a ring toss game to a 12-year-old and accepted defeat like a man reconsidering all his life choices. Then someone behind them said his name, not loudly, but with recognition. "Daniel Reed?" Daniel stopped. Sophie felt the change in him before she understood it. His shoulders tightened. His face went blank. A man in a gray jacket stood near the cider booth, staring at him. The man's expression was not friendly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the man looked at Sophie, looked back at Daniel, and said, coldly, "Didn't expect to see you here." The warmth of the festival seemed to drain away. Daniel's hand, which had been close to Sophie's a second earlier, dropped to his side. "Take care," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. Sophie followed, confused and suddenly uneasy. "Daniel?" He did not stop until they reached the edge of the parking lot. I'm sorry, he said. I should go. What happened? Nothing. That wasn't nothing. He looked at her then, and the fear in his eyes was no longer hidden well enough. I'm sorry, he repeated. Then he left. Sophie stood beneath the glow of the festival lights, surrounded by music and laughter, holding 2 untouched paper cups of cider. For the first time, she understood that Daniel was not just private. He was hiding from something, and whatever it was, other people already knew. Daniel apologized 2 days after the festival, not with excuses, with flowers. Unfortunately, they were from the grocery store, still wrapped in plastic, with a discount sticker he had forgotten to remove. Sophie stared at the bouquet. Daniel stared at the sticker. Then he sighed. I panicked in the floral section. Sophie should have stayed angry longer. Instead, she laughed. That became the problem with Daniel Reed. He made it difficult to protect herself from liking him. He did not explain what had happened at the festival. Not fully. He only said there were parts of his past he was not proud of, and that some people still had reasons to remember him badly. It was not enough. But it was honest enough to keep the door open, so Sophie let him stay in her life, carefully. One Friday, he came to the preschool's family day to help build cardboard boats with the children. Sophie had warned him it would be chaotic. Daniel had said he worked with wood and marine repairs, so he could handle paper, glue, and children. He was wrong. Within 20 minutes, one child had glued a feather to his sleeve. Another had declared him a horse. Mia, the same girl who once judged his shoes, climbed onto his back while shouting, "To the moon!" Daniel looked at Sophie from across the classroom with silent, betrayed panic. Sophie laughed so hard she had to sit down. By the end of the event, Daniel's cardboard boat looked less like a boat and more like a structural apology. The children loved him anyway. Later that week, Sophie visited his workshop near the docks. It smelled of cedar, salt, varnish, and sawdust. Half-finished wooden boats rested under hanging lights. Tools lined the walls. The whole place felt quiet in a way that did not feel lonely. Daniel showed her how he shaped wood for the curve of a hull. His hands moved with calm confidence, gentle over rough surfaces. Sophie liked watching him there. In his workshop, Daniel seemed less like a man hiding from life and more like a man trying to make something strong enough to float. That evening, they sat outside near the water while the sky turned lavender. Daniel spoke first. I know I scared you at the festival. Sophie looked at him. Yes, I'm sorry. I know. He rubbed his thumb along a scar on his hand. Sometimes people recognize me, and I become someone I don't want to be anymore. She waited. I survived something, he said finally. Someone else didn't. Sophie felt the weight in that sentence. He did not say more. This time, she did not push. Instead, she told him something of her own, that she often felt ordinary, replaceable, like the kind of woman people described as sweet when they couldn't think of anything more interesting. Daniel looked at her as if she had said the most impossible thing. Sophie, he said softly, you make people
Thuyền đẹp
feel
quá,
safe.
anh làm được
She
đấy.
laughed,
Cảm ơn em.
uncomfortable.
Cùng nhau làm
That's
thì
not
vui hơn.
exactly
Đúng
exciting.
vậy, em
It
thích
is when
quá.
you've spent
Khi nào xong?
years feeling like a
Sắp
threat.
rồi, tuần
The
sau thử
words
nước được.
stayed with her. A week later, after dinner, Daniel walked her home beneath a soft Seattle rain. They stopped under the awning outside her building, both reluctant to say goodnight. There was no dramatic music, no perfect moonlight, just wet pavement, distant traffic.